What an incredibly special journey we have been on, all these chapters exploring Jesus' ministry and his teachings. We've learned so much. But Jesus was not left to just carry on his ministry. He faced increasingly hostile opposition. And how he responded to that opposition is very important for us. In his attention to sinners, he was opposed by the religious leaders, and if he backed down, that would then break the bond that he had established with them. If he didn't back down, he would be able to seal that bond that he and through him God had established with them. So his response to the opposition is very important. It would either make or break his ministry. Let's explore the religious opposition to Jesus. This was led by the Pharisees, the scribes, the teachers of the law, the rabbis. Their great opposition to Jesus was because of his friendship with sinners. And remember, sinners is this broad category of outcasts and the poor. His friendship with sinners was a problem because Jesus clearly had a friendship with God, a very intimate friendship with God, a very intimate relationship with God. And to be a friend of God should mean that you are an enemy of sinners. And to be a friend of sinners and a friend of God at the same time just was not acceptable to them. Their belief, for example, was that when the Messiah came, God would, through the Messiah, judge the sinners, condemn them, and bless the righteous, and that they, as Pharisees and scribes and teachers of the law and rabbis, were the righteous who would be blessed. But Jesus comes and has this Messiah identity, and yet is a friend of the sinners and welcomes them and says the kingdom of God is particularly for them. So this would have made them regard him as a blasphemer. They also were very unhappy with his relationship with the law. They regarded it as impious, not respectful enough. He seemed to accept the law in some instances and go against the law in others. All of this would have underlined him as a blasphemer, because he was so particularly doing this in the name of God. He was then blaspheming, taking the Lord's name in vain. And for them, the penalty for that was death. Let's explore the political threat that Jesus posed. This was mainly to the Sadducees, the chief priests, which included the high priest and his family, the Herodians, and the rulers of the Roman Empire, the Roman officials, particularly in Palestine. Jesus' acceptance of the status of Messiah and the public view of him as a Messiah, and his insistence that God ruled and that God was the one who should be honored and that God's kingdom had come, really set him up as one promoting a rival empire. And Rome very easily executed people who set up rival empires or who in any way opposed absolute Roman rule. The Sadducees and the chief priests were in an alliance with Rome. So, for example, Roman officials appointed the chief priests. The Sadducees and the chief priests, which included the high priest, all were in this alliance with Rome, and so they benefited from the status quo. They didn't want anyone opposing Roman rule. They got a lot out of their relationship with Rome. They had access to the temple resources. They had authority in the temple. And so their alliance was a political alliance, and Jesus was posing a political threat to them, especially when, for example, he did that great prophetic event in the temple that we call the cleansing of the temple. That whole turmoil that he caused in the temple went exactly against what Rome expected of them, which was to keep peace in the temple. And so they decided they needed to speak to the Roman official to have Jesus executed. The opposition to Jesus became so fierce that his death was inevitable. Jesus was faced with a choice. Either he continue what he has been doing that has caused the opposition, or he tone it down so that the opposition retreats a bit and that his life isn't threatened anymore. And Jesus makes the choice to continue his ministry, continue his love, continue his friendship with sinners, continue the proclamation of the kingdom, continue to be coming to the defense of the oppressed. And he is willing, therefore, to face the consequences of that. He chooses to rather be faithful to his love, God's love for humanity, than to water that down. Someone summarized it in this way. They said what was in Jesus' heart was this: you can take my life, but you can't take my love. And so Jesus allows himself to be arrested, and he suffers the execution that had threatened for so long. He sees it as paying a price. He sees it as paying a price for his love, God's love for humanity, being faithful to that, seeing it as paying the price for what he has stood for. In this journey, we have seen that in Jesus' birth and in his ministry, he has established a friendship between God and humanity. Through dying rather than betraying that friendship, he seals it forever. Jesus' death is not a defeat, it is a victory. It is the victory of his faithfulness. He has remained faithful to his love, God's love for humanity. he has remained faithful to his calling. He has remained faithful to the love bond that he had established between God and humanity. It is also a victory against sin and evil. Sin and oppression could not win with him, and so he is victorious. It's even a victory over death. Yes, his death is a victory over death, because the threat of death, the fear of death, could not prevent him from continuing with his ministry, even though it would cost his life. And so we appreciate that in the battle between good and evil, evil only wins when it can get the good person to do evil. But if evil cannot get the good person to do evil, and even if the good person gives his or her life for good, that good has won. And this is the victory of Jesus. His death is a victory. In chapter 12, we saw how Jesus taught that loving service is the most powerful force in the world. Earlier on in this video, we were impressed about how Jesus gives his life as an act of loving service in the face of much hatred, to such an extent that he is loving even in death to proclaim forgiveness and grace to those who are crucifying him. In those memorable words, "Father, forgive them, they don't know what they are doing." How is it that Jesus came to be able to make such a remarkable act of loving service? Well, he had accumulated the power to do that. Steadily over his life, smaller acts of loving service had accumulated a reservoir and a capacity to love, so that he could do such a great thing, the supreme act of love. Well, on the third day after his death, a discovery is made that indeed loving service is the most powerful force in the universe, that he is discovered alive, ministering again, appearing to the disciples. His tomb is empty, a victorious life risen from a hateful execution. So powerful is love that it cannot hold him, that death cannot hold him. Even death cannot keep love captive, cannot keep it down. His life rose from the ground like a seed that had been sown, now rising to new life. The power of love is also on display in that Jesus returns to the very people who had rejected him, the very people who had executed him, those who had denied him. He returns graciously, lovingly, forgivingly. This is incredible. This is incredible. This is the glorious power of love that cannot be kept down. It is a beautiful demonstration, a beautiful enactment, a beautiful reality that is part of our world. So the resurrection is a beautiful demonstration to the whole world that sin does not have the power to break the love bond that God seeks between God's self and humanity. It does not have that power. And the resurrection is a beautiful demonstration of that. And so then Jesus ministers again, and in that resurrection period of ministry, we see him also dealing with the other three relationships of life. I've referred now to our relationship with God, but in our relationship with ourselves, for example, in his relationship with Peter, we see him dealing with Peter in a loving way so that Peter can find his direction again and have his faculties pressed into the service of love and the service of the kingdom. We see in Jesus's relationship with the disciples as a whole, his commissioning of them, the last act before his ascension, and in that commissioning he is uniting them into a body, a missionary body, and so one is seeing a community being formed, a missionary community being formed. And then in the very act of Jesus returning to this world, we see something very important about our relationship with creation. Jesus returns to this world in the resurrection, and thereby is showing us the importance of this world and the importance of our relationship with this world, our commitment to this world, our not giving up on this world, our solidarity with this world, with creation and the environment and all that the environment is. Behind me is a cross. It's been on display since our video series began. And as you look closely at the cross now, you will see that it is a beautiful eruption of life on this symbol of death. It's a resurrection cross. It's very precious to me. It was carved by my mother. My mother took up wood carving in her retirement as a retirement hobby, and she became very good at it. After some years, she still persisted, even though her osteoarthritis hands made it very difficult for her and would eventually mean that she would have to stop the hobby. But she made this cross for me, and it is very precious. As you look at the cross, you are seeing leaves and fruit and budding on that cross. You even see a twirly vine that reminds me of a horn of plenty. Every inch of the cross is erupting with life, with foliage, and it's a beautiful demonstration of resurrection power, that the life-giving power of God cannot be stopped. It is a reality, and it is the greatest force in the world. The life-giving power of God, yes, can be interrupted. It can be opposed. It can be slowed down, but it can never be stopped. And the cross, the crucifixion of Jesus, shows that even the world's greatest attempt at stopping the love of God actually turned out to be the catalyst for the greatest success in the love of God, the greatest fruitfulness in the love of God. As Jesus himself said in John's Gospel, chapter 12, verse 24, "Very truly I tell you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains just a single grain, but if it dies, it bears much fruit." This precious cross from my mom is a beautiful demonstration of that John 12:24 passage. We have had a very detailed journey of appreciating Jesus' ministry. We have drawn meaning from his birth. We have appreciated deeply the various contours of his death and the meaning of his death. This has been an important journey. reflecting on his resurrection is a source of great hope. There is so much that we've learned. I want us to take a step back from this now and appreciate as a whole what we are discovering about the nature of God, the character of God, God's will, God's way, and also the meaning of Jesus' death. I want to particularly focus first on the character of God and God's will and God's way in the world. And what I offer now is hopefully going to help you filter good ideas from less good ideas about God. And we live in a society that has many different voices saying this is what God is like and this is what God wants. And even if they are using the name Jesus, I want us to be able to appreciate whether their ideas are faithful to Jesus or not. And so this is a very important journey. Not everything goes in terms of what people say, even if they're just using the name Jesus. The original writers of the New Testament, the writers of the Gospels, the writers of the letters and the apocalyptic literature, they all were convinced that Jesus reveals God to us and God's character. And that if we want to understand what God is like, we need to look to Jesus. And whatever picture we develop of God, that picture must be a Christ-like picture. So in other words, these writers had come to a very clear kingdom consciousness. They saw life through the eyes, through the spectacles, as it were, that Jesus had given them. And in that kingdom consciousness, they saw clearly that Jesus was God come to us, and that in Jesus, reconciliation in the four relationships of life was a reality that had become available to all. And they were also clear that Jesus reveals God's ways to us. And these writers have various ways of describing this, and there are some very beautiful passages about it. Of course, it is that belief that is carrying the whole of the New Testament, but there are some passages that say this in such a profound way, and I list a number of those passages to you on page 289 and 290. I want to read one of the passages to you, which is perhaps for me the favorite, and I also have it right in the front of the book. Colossians 1, verse 17 to 20. So Paul writing, and remember Paul is writing before the Gospels, and he sums it up in this incredible way. Referring to Jesus, he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For in him all things in heaven and on earth were created, things visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or powers. All things have been created through him and for him. He himself is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he might come to have first place in everything. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell. And through him God was pleased to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, by making peace through the blood of the cross. One can say so much about that passage. It really is worth many, many days of reflection, a lifetime of reflection. But simply put, they are saying that Jesus is God come to us. In Jesus, God is at work in this world. In Jesus, we see God's way. In Jesus, we see God's will. Jesus is God's action in the world. Jesus is God's response to sin, evil and death in the world. And as Christians, we are followers of Jesus. Our faith is in Him. He is the one that determines for us our understanding of God. So some of the qualities that Jesus has made clear to us about the nature of God is that God is a God of love and compassion. And as you look at Jesus to understand God, you see that God is not a God who retaliates, who takes vengeance on enemies, who curses. You see actually that God is a God who is prepared to suffer, feels the suffering of the world. God is a fellow sufferer who understands the suffering of the world. William Barclay put it this way: the cross was a window in time allowing us to see the suffering love which is eternally in the heart of God. I want to underline this further because there is so much that's important here. These are the words of Carlo Coretto, who writes these words about what we come to understand about God through the revelation of Jesus. That God is beautiful is no secret. It's written in every flower on the sea and on the mountain. That God is immense is no secret. All you have to do is look at the universe. What is the secret? Here it is. God is a crucified God. God is the God who allows Himself to be defeated. God is the God who has revealed Himself in the poor. God is the God who has washed my feet. God is Jesus of Nazareth. We are not accustomed to a God like this. So there are a number of implications of this as we seek to understand God. And what the implication then is that Jesus must become the lens through which we filter all ideas that are presented to us about God. Jesus becomes the lens by which we even read Scripture. And in Scripture, if there is a verse that is contrary to the revelation of God in Jesus, then we do not give that verse an equal standing to the revelation that we have of God in Jesus. We do not let that verse, that teaching, that passage replace what we have come to understand about God in Jesus. We must interpret that passage in a way that helps us make sense of it in the light of the God revealed in Jesus. It also means that I must not hold on to a belief that is contrary to the God revealed in Jesus. I mustn't let those beliefs replace what I know about God as Jesus has enabled me to know it. So the challenge, the invitation is that even if I can find scriptural support for a certain belief or stance, if it doesn't really match up with Jesus, His ministry, and how He helps me to understand God, then I must let go of that belief. I cannot hold on to something, or I am challenged to not hold on to something that is contradictory to Jesus and His ministry, even if it's there in the Bible. So the God I hold on to and the beliefs I hold on to must be Christ-like. Jesus is the revelation of God to me and has that superiority over the library of books that we call the Bible. Yes, almost everything we know about Jesus comes to us in the Bible, and the Bible is therefore precious to us. But as Christians, we are those who follow Jesus. We are those whose faith is in Jesus and what He has revealed to us. The Bible, as a library is thousands of years in the making, many, many different authors. Jesus is for us the center and the one who gives us our direction and the one who gives us our orientation. The Bible as a resource does not have superiority over Jesus. So everything I have said about Jesus' birth, his ministry, his death and resurrection, and the significance of that is aligned with a particular theory of the atonement, the theory of the saving work of Jesus. It's aligned to what we call the classic theory of the atonement. Now, the classic theory of the atonement was the first theory developed by the followers of Jesus, the early Jesus movement, the early church, and the period of the church fathers. In fact, it was the theory that lasted for 1,000 years in both Western Christianity and Eastern Christianity, the classic theory of the atonement. It was a theory that was replaced by a book that was written in the 11th century by Anselm of Canterbury. He wrote a book in Latin. It was called Cur Deus Homo. The title in English is Why the God-Man. And in that book, he sought to give a philosophical interpretation of Jesus' saving work, an interpretation that would, in the Latin world, make sense of the medieval focus on law and on judiciary and legalism in the medieval world. And so he developed this picture that really became very popular in Christianity, particularly Western Christianity. And that theory is the theory of penal substitution, also can be called vicarious satisfaction or vicarious punishment. Vicarious meaning on behalf of another. So Jesus is punished on behalf of another. Jesus satisfies the demands of God's justice on behalf of another. Penal substitution in the sense of legal substitution. Jesus is substituted for another in a legal matter. Now, that may well be the view that you hold, or your view is close to that. For most people in the West, both Protestant and Catholic, this is the view that is held. However, there is more truth I want to offer in the classic view, and this book is aligned to the classic view. So it begs the question then, well, how many views of the atonement are there, and which one is right? Which one should I hold? And so in service to you, I explain the different views of the atonement in broad categories, and then I give you tools with which you can make choices about the different views, and I offer some critique of the different views. And so that I do in this chapter, chapter 14, between pages 292 to 296. But the matter is so important that I also have a whole appendix, Appendix 1, devoted to this, which is found on page 450 to 458. And so I do encourage you to take that journey, and I trust and pray that it will be meaningful for you. The relevance of it in this chapter is, of course, because we are focusing on Jesus' death and his resurrection, the culmination of his atoning work. But the relevance is also because we are reflecting on what God does Jesus reveal to us. And theories of the atonement are really theories about how God is at work. And so they take us to the heart of that important question as well. I want to make a very beautiful suggestion to you now. I think it'll be life-giving for you. I've certainly practiced this myself many times. And the suggestion is that you spend time, I'm suggesting 3 months as a start. And even if you've done something like this before, I'm inviting you into this practice again. So the Gospels were clearly written so that we may get to know Jesus. So take one of the Gospels, either Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, and journey with it for 3 months, reading no more than 10 verses a day. And as you read, sink into your relationship with Jesus. Make it an exercise of getting to know Jesus as much as you possibly can about Jesus. As you read, come to see all that there can be seen through the 10 verses you're reading on that day. You know, what is it saying about Jesus, his character, his motivations? What's important to him? What's his take on life? Why does he do what he does? What's his impact on people? What would his impact be on me if I was there then? What does this all mean for me? And so let Jesus grow on you. Let him develop 3-dimensionally for you as you go through this journey. I think it'll be really special for you. I encourage you in it. I've mentioned it very briefly now, but on pages 297 and 298, I unpack the idea quite a bit more and the impact of the idea. I want to close with a nutshell summary, and I want to put it this way. Jesus' birth, his ministry, his life, his death, his resurrection continue to have a profound effect on life. Reality changed as a result of him. In his birth, a unity was established between God and humanity, a unity that would stand for all time. In his ministry, he deepened that unity to become a friendship, and he also established a reconciliation, a friendship, a unity, a community between people and their environment, people within themselves, and people with each other. In his death, because he dies rather than betrays everything that he's done, he therefore seals what he has done, and in sealing it makes it stand and secure and victorious for all time. That is demonstrated to be true in his resurrection. And so that is a reality that is available to all. And so to appreciate then that this is a life-transforming, world-transforming change to reality, and that it turns the world the right way up again. It's something revolutionary. It's something radical. It goes right to the root. We who are part of this faith movement are radicals. We are revolutionaries. We live in a world turned the right way up, eager to be part of God's work where it's still upside down, to turn it the right way up again. So we come to the end of this chapter. It's been a big mammoth chapter. It's been a long journey that has brought us to the end of chapter 14 and the deep dive into Jesus' ministry. There's much for you to talk about. I'm glad you have a small group to talk to, or I trust and pray that you have a small group or some people to talk to. Do please do that now. Take a break, take a stretch, and then dive into the group. I have questions which I hope will be helpful to you. Page 302 and 303. Don't forget that Appendix 1 deals more deeply with these things, so that's something to read through. These really are important matters, and I believe you'll be helped by them. Don't forget the one-page summary on page 301. Don't forget the God Spoke to Me page on page 304. God bless you.